So let's just take a moment and start over with this verse again. The Lord is near to all who call upon Him, to all who call upon Him in truth. He will fulfill the desires of those who fear Him. He will also hear their cries and save them. David was a man after God's own heart. And as I said before, this psalm that he sang was true in his life several times. So I'm sure when David was singing this, there was a lot of praise going up to God. I want to jump from this psalm and I want to go to the book of Daniel. Daniel 3 to be exact. So that's what we're going to go off of. So I got to catch back up on my notes because I jump up on my notes here and I don't really mean to. Okay? So here in Daniel, we have Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And I want to tell you that they feared God more than they feared man. One of the things that you've heard me say in the past is, I wished I would have taught my kids how to fear the Lord. Hopefully when I'm done today, you will understand what I meant when I said that. Because the fear that we have of God should not always be with trembling. Okay? So, what does it mean to fear God? Is it a type of fear with trembling, I can't even talk this morning, trembling, or is it a fear that is with love and reverence? I'm going to go into Daniel 3, and the word fear is not in this verse, but it is very much implied because of their stance on who they serve. Their God, not Nebuchadnezzar's. Okay? So, let's take a moment and look at fear. Fear, when we think of fear, we think of something that is unpleasant and emotional, caused by a belief that someone or something is dangerous and can cause pain or a threat to us. That's a lot of times what we think about fear. And when we think about fear this way, we can think of a person that has been controlled by fear or is controlled by fear. Somebody that can be manipulated into doing things that they otherwise would not do. So, somebody comes along and we have a timid person and they're being bullied. They're being bullied to the point where they're doing things that they wouldn't normally do because of a threat or the actions of a person. And if we think of this, a lot of times we think of a bully, somebody that has been bullied into doing something. The bully on the playground. Okay? And in Matthew 10:28, do not fear those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul, but rather fear him who has the ability to destroy both soul and body in hell. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they understood this. Even though this verse had not been written. They understood it. In Daniel 3, we see an example of fearing God over man. And that's what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego do in this verse. Okay? So, they understand that to fear God is the place to go, is the place to be. I looked up some things on the internet, and what I go to is a place that's called StudyLight, studylight.com. In this, David Guzik is somebody that that Nathaniel uses a lot, and I've used him a lot in my messages before. And one of the things that he says, sinners have a good reason to fear God, because God's punishment will one day fall upon them. Believers also fear God, but theirs is a different sort of fear. Their fear of God is mixed with love. That's the desire that I would have loved to put in my kids. Okay? It is important to understand that to fear God, but also to love Him. If we just feared God and served Him out of that fear, would we be not any more than just a puppet doing something because we're scared? God did not give us a free will for no reason. He gave us a free will so that we can love and to serve Him because we want that choice. It is our choice to serve Him, to love Him. We don't want to be a puppet. I think everybody in here has had to the point where they have had fear come over them in some way or another, and it affects the way we act. It affects who we are at that moment. And then when it passes, it's like, wow. Ugh. You get that trembling that comes over you, and you go, ugh, I didn't like that. That was not pleasant. Our God is not a bully. He is gentle, loving, caring, and a giving God. Also, when I was doing research, I Googled fear. And I come across this guy, and his name is Jack Wellman. He wrote this in 2014. Okay? The root meaning of reverence. The Hebrew word for fear is yar. Y-A-R-E. I hope I said that right. And its literal meaning is to fear, to be afraid, or to rever. Other meanings of this word in Arabic are to stand in awe, to have a deep respect or honor. As the way the word fear is used in the New Testament Greek, phobe, from which we get the word phobia, means to put to flight by terrifying, to flee, to be afraid. But also, the meaning of reverence and to hesitate. So when we are told to fear God, we are commanded to have a deep, abiding respect for Him, which includes a holy, reverential fear, honor of Him, because He is able to cast both body and soul into hell, which I have read already, Matthew 10:28, which man has only power to kill the body. Jesus was telling His followers that persecution would be coming, but not to fear man, but to fear God, because only God has the ability to cast both the body and the soul into hell. It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. That, to me, really sums it up on what fear is. And something that I think that we forget is just how holy and awesome of a God we serve, who Jesus is. And in John, the first part of John, tells us that Jesus was with God from the beginning. And this is something that we need to remember, who God is, how holy He is. We forget a lot of times just how holy He is and the reverence that we're supposed to have before God. Let's go to Daniel 3. Okay? Bring you up to speed because I'm not going to read the whole verse. In Daniel 3, Nebuchadnezzar becomes full of himself. He builds an image of gold. And he says, all right, when you hear the music of the harp, the lyre, all these different instruments, you need to do what? Bow down and worship the golden image. So here we have a man that is full of himself, and this worship is done with fear. Do this or be thrown where? Into the furnace. Now, growing up, I grew up in northern Idaho, and there was a mine refinery up there. And one of the things that was my job when I worked there right out of high school was to work at the furnace. So they take this coal and the ore and they put it into this big box. And they pumped air into it after they got the coal burning. And the coal, it was called coke because it was mixed with other things, it would burn and it would melt the ore that was in there. To give you an idea of this, think of the steel mills. How many guys have seen pictures of the steel mills? The guys running and pouring the hot molten liquid. Well, one of the things that I had to do, I was called a tapper. And they had this hole that was about 4 inches. And so as the ore would melt and come up, you would have to tap it off. So you plug the hole, and ore would come up, and the molten liquid would come up above that hole. Then you knock the hole open, and you take the slag off. And over here on the other side of this furnace is where they took the metal off. The metal that was up there was lead, silver, zinc, and gold. Those were the things that they took off of this furnace. But when you tap this hole, this molten liquid, if it was coming out right, it would just sort of run out like you see in the steel mills. And so it would run out. And if you were messing up and you weren't paying attention, it would blow. And it was like it was called the blast furnace, and out of this hole would shoot the molten liquid and rocks and chunks, they're just glowing red, and they just spew them all over, and you stood sort of behind the shield and you try to plug this hole up. And if you weren't quick enough, you were getting burnt. So one of the things that I think about when I think of a furnace is that. Well, I'm not for sure what type of furnace this was, but this is something that a furnace, you've got to remember just how hot it is. And I tell you this story to have an idea just how hot this furnace could be. Okay? So, I want to make sure that I don't get ahead of myself. Okay. So, the image has been made. The command has gone out that when they hear the music that they need to fall down and worship. Okay, there were some Chaldeans that when the music was played, they noticed that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they weren't worshiping. Have you ever noticed that there's always somebody that's self-righteous, that is always the one person that is irritable, and they want to make themselves better? And so what do? They go tattle. So they go before King Nebuchadnezzar and they say, King, hey, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they are not bowing down to your idol when the music is played. Now, why did the Chaldeans do this? I think they did it for one of two reasons. One, they saw that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they weren't following the command. And that was probably just a big no-no. But I think the other thing that they did was what they were doing, these Chaldeans were a little jealous of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Because I think Nebuchadnezzar had a little bit of a relation with them. I think Nebuchadnezzar respected them. And the reason I say that is I will show you here in a moment. Okay? But these Chaldeans were jealous. They wanted them out of the way. They wanted these Jewish people out of the way. They wanted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to be gone. Now, I don't know where Daniel was. And if Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were like Daniel, what did they do? They went and they prayed earnestly and truly before God. How many times a day? 3 times a day. Okay? And I'm sure Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were doing the same thing. Because I think these 4 men were a tight group. I think they got fellowship from one another. They got support from one another. I really do think this. Now, let's go ahead and read Daniel, in Daniel 3. We're going to start at 13 and go through 18 here. Then Nebuchadnezzar, I guess we need to back up a moment. So, the Chaldeans have gone to the king and said, hey, these guys aren't bowing down to them. So, then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and fury, gave the command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image which I have set up? A little pride there, isn't it? Now, if you are ready at the time you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, the lyre, and the psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, that you fall down and worship the image which I have made. Good. But if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. And who is the God, little g, who will deliver you from my hand? So, if we take a moment and think about this, Nebuchadnezzar knows that there's no way that they're going to escape this furnace. He has control of them. He is the king of this province. He has control of whose life right now? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So he thinks. Now, let's give Nebuchadnezzar a little credit here. And this is why I think that Nebuchadnezzar had a little bit of a relationship and respected these three men. Because what did he do? He just didn't give the order, cast them into the furnace. He could have done that. To his credit, Nebuchadnezzar did not accept the accusation of heresy. He made sure of it with a personal interview. If he did not have any respect for these men, would he have given them a personal interview? He wouldn't have. Okay? This was a greater event or a greater test for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It is one thing to stand your ground and say, I'm not going to do that. But it's another when you are brought before the king or even before a firing squad and asked, is it true? Is it true? This is, to me, this is one of the greatest things here. Okay? Because when we see this in 17 and 18, verse 17 and 18, we see Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's answer. King, we don't have to answer this to you. I didn't finish reading that, did I? Let's see. I guess I did. Thank you. Sorry. So, in 17 and 18, we see their answer. We're not going to bow down to your gods or to this image that you made. And God is going to save us. And if He doesn't, oh well. God is going to, if He saves us, good. If He doesn't, oh well. We're still not going to worship this God or this image that you have made. We're not going to worship your gods. We are going to worship the one true God who they have always worshiped. They knew where their salvation came from. So what did King Nebuchadnezzar do? He's mad now. He's really ticked off. He gives the command to make that furnace 7 times hotter than normal. So now we have a furnace that is in a lot hotter. And the other command that he gives, he says, bind these men. And he commands some mighty men of his army to cast them into the furnace. This furnace is so hot that the men that are putting Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the furnace, they are killed. And it says that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they do what? They fall into the furnace. Okay? So let's pick up at 24 through 30. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are in the furnace. Then the king Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he rose in haste and spoke, saying to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men into the midst of this fire?" They answered and said to the king, "True, O king." "Look," he answered, "I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire. They are not hurt, and the form of the 4th is like the Son of God." Do you think the presence of Christ was with them? I do. Then Nebuchadnezzar went near the mouth of the burning furnace and spoke, saying, "Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here." Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came from the midst of the fire. And the satraps, the ministers, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered, and they saw that these men's bodies, the fire had no power. Their hair was not singed, nor their garments affected, and the smell of smoke was not on them. How many times have we been at a campfire and you singe your hair on your arms? Okay? So here we have this furnace that is really hot. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were what? They were bound and put in there. The only thing that was burned up was what was binding them. That was the only thing that was burned up in that furnace. Their hair wasn't singed. Their clothes wasn't affected. They were free of any effects of this fire. 100%. Can you just imagine? Here's the counselors, the satraps, and the king are looking, and they're walking around, these guys. You wonder if they even touched him. Are you a ghost? Are you real? In 28, Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him. And they have frustrated the king's word and yielded their bodies, that they should not serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I make a decree that people of nations or language, any speaks any mishap against God and of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut to pieces, and their houses shall be made of ash heap, because there is no other God who can deliver like this." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Here we see that God shows up and saves Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They are saved. What does that do for King Nebuchadnezzar? Nebuchadnezzar sees the power of God, I think, for the first time in the book of Daniel. Nebuchadnezzar continues throughout his life to see the power that God has over him and his providence. But let's remember who we're talking about here, because we're talking about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Who did they fear more? They feared God more than man. Their response to the king was, hey, it doesn't matter what you do to us, we are still not going to bend a knee. That is, I think, is the key thing. For their stance on serving God and who He is, what did God do? He gave them their desire, which was what? Be delivered from the furnace. I mean, that was their true desire, and that was God's, obviously. So they were saved. But what else happened? The other thing that happened is these three men, because of their reverence to God, were promoted. He will fill the desires of those who fear Him. He also will hear their cries and save them. Let's take a moment. Let's think of Peter. What did Peter do? He denied Christ how many times? 3 times. In Matthew 26, 69 through 75, this is where he denies Christ. Christ already told him that he was going to deny them. I'm not for sure, but I think fear overtook Peter. I really do. Because the third time he started to curse, and what happened? The rooster crowed. I tell you this, when that rooster crowed, that was Peter's road to Damascus. I really truly think that truly changed Peter and who he was. Now, it doesn't say that Peter denied Christ out of fear. But he stepped back. And with the other disciples, what did they do? They fled the situation. They went the other direction. But there was still enough of Peter's faith there that he was still lurking, watching from a distance. So, I bring Peter up for a reason. Fear affected him. I really do believe that. Fear affects us all in some way or another. And if we keep in mind our faith, our walk, and we're truly diligent in seeking Christ, seeking His Father, we are going to be saved, physically and spiritually. That's the kind of fear that I would like to have taught my kids. Because that is truly what fear is to have a reverence and an awe for God, to respect Him, and to put Him first. I'm going to give you 3 other men to think about. Do a little bit of research. Because this verse held true for them. 1, Joseph. 2, Job. And 3, Daniel. All 3 of these men feared God over men. All 3 of these men We're blessed by God. And one last thing here, and I'll close with this. The trials that we go through affect us deeply. If we're seeking God through those trials, what happens to our faith? What happens to our walk? It is affected deeply. If we stay true to God, He will also hear our cries and save us. We are going to become a new creation in Him. Thank you.